Moments later, Khepri and his assistants returned. Everything appeared exactly as they had left it. The royal kitchen master raised his hand. "It is time." Together, the 5 lead chefs lifted the ceremonial trays. Behind each stood 4 assistants, carrying the remaining dishes. In perfect order, they began the solemn procession toward the grand banquet hall. Beyond the enormous bronze doors, hundreds of guests had already gathered: kings, queens, princes, princesses, ambassadors, generals, scholars, merchants. The greatest banquet of the year was about to begin. The palace herald struck the marble floor with his ceremonial staff. The hall fell completely silent. In a voice that echoed through every corner of the chamber, he proclaimed, "All rise for His Majesty, Pharaoh Neferkare." Every person stood. Khepri lowered his head with the other servants as the pharaoh entered and took his place upon the throne. The herald continued, "His honored guest, His Majesty, King Asherim of the Eastern Kingdom." Another respectful bow followed as the foreign king entered beside his son. Prince Zarek carried himself with effortless confidence. He offered polite smiles where custom required them, yet his eyes revealed little warmth. The herald lifted his staff once more. "And now, Her Royal Highness, Princess Anippe of the Kingdom of Kemet." Khepri barely listened. His attention remained fixed upon the tray resting in his hands. Then, a familiar voice gently answered, "Father." The single word struck him like thunder. His heart skipped. Slowly, almost unwillingly, he lifted his eyes. Time itself seemed to stop. The young woman, walking gracefully into the hall, wore flowing white linen embroidered with gold. A royal diadem rested upon her brow. Jewels shimmered beneath the palace lights. Every noble bowed as she passed. Every servant lowered their eyes. Yet Khepri saw none of them. He saw only her, Lani. No, not Lani. Princess Anippe, the woman who had laughed beside the Nile. The woman who had burned 3 loaves of bread before finally making one fit to eat. The woman who had mended fishing nets so poorly that the fish escaped through holes large enough for a child. The woman he had dreamed of building a future with. She had never been the daughter of a noble family. She was the daughter of Pharaoh himself. His fingers tightened around the edge of the serving tray. One of his assistants whispered urgently, "Master Khepri." He barely heard him. Across the hall, Princess Anippe lifted her eyes. The moment she saw the young man standing among the royal chefs, her breath caught. Khepri. He was here, inside the palace. For one endless heartbeat, their eyes met across the crowded banquet hall. Neither smiled, neither spoke, neither dared reveal what they truly felt. Around them, the ceremony continued, as though nothing had happened. But for Khepri, the world he had known only moments before had quietly fallen apart. For what felt like an eternity, neither Khepri nor Princess Anippe could look away. The bustling banquet hall, the music, the conversations, the flickering torchlight, everything around them faded into silence. There was only the distance separating them, only the truth that now stood between them. Khepri finally understood every unanswered question. Why she always disappeared without warning. Why she could never invite him to her home. Why she knew things that no ordinary young woman should have known. Why every visit to the river had always been carefully measured. Lani had never truly existed. She had been Princess Anippe all along. Across the hall, Anippe felt as though the air had been stolen from her lungs. He knew. She saw the realization in his eyes. She wanted to speak, to explain, to tell him that every smile beside the Nile had been real, that every loaf of bread she had burned, every laugh they had shared, every promise she had made had come from her true heart. But she could not move. Not here. Not before an entire court. Prince Zarek followed her gaze. His sharp eyes settled briefly upon the line of servants carrying the ceremonial dishes. Then, without a word, he gently, but unmistakably possessively, placed a hand around Anippe's arm. "My lady," he said, with a polite smile that never reached his eyes, "our seats await." His touch was light, yet it felt like chains. Anippe lowered her eyes immediately. not because she welcomed his touch, but because she feared someone else might notice where she had been looking. If even a single noble suspected that the Princess of Kemet shared an unspoken connection with a young village cook, Khepri's life could be forfeit before the night was over. So she swallowed her grief, allowed herself to be guided to her seat, and never looked back. Across the hall, Khepri watched the prince escort her to the place prepared beside him. A quiet ache spread through his chest. Perhaps, he thought, this was where she had always belonged. Perhaps he had only been a pleasant memory from another life. He lowered his eyes. No matter how badly his heart hurt, he still carried the honor of Kemet upon his shoulders. There would be time to grieve later. For now, he had a duty. The royal kitchen master stepped forward. The first challenge of the 3 dishes of the Nile shall now be judged. Servants moved with practiced precision, placing the magnificent banquets before the panel of 7 judges. The feast prepared by the Eastern Kingdom was unveiled first. Golden lids were lifted one by one. Beautifully roasted meats, exquisite carvings, elegant presentation. The judges nodded with quiet approval. "It is certainly impressive," one ambassador observed. "It is," agreed Master Chef Hori. "But," he leaned slightly closer, "I smell very little." Royal physician Menes inhaled thoughtfully. "The aromas are faint." King Asherem smiled confidently. "Our chefs have always favored refinement over boldness." Then came Kemet's banquet. As the heavy lids were lifted, fragrant steam rose into the air. Honey, fresh herbs, roasted lamb, citrus, slow-simmered broth. The entire hall seemed to fill with the comforting scent of home. Several guests closed their eyes without realizing it. Master Chef Dagon smiled despite himself. "Now that," he said softly, "is a royal feast." Even King Asherem raised an impressed eyebrow. Pharaoh Neferkare looked toward the royal kitchens with quiet pride. The first category was judged. Presentation. The scores were nearly equal. Then came aroma. Without hesitation, nearly every judge awarded Kemet the higher marks. A ripple of hopeful whispers spread through the hall. Khepri's assistants exchanged relieved smiles. His mother quietly folded her hands in gratitude. The hardest part was over. Now, only the tasting remained. Royal physician Menes lifted the ceremonial spoon and sampled the broth. His expression changed almost immediately. He frowned. He tasted it again. Master Chef Hori accepted a spoonful. The moment it touched his tongue, he coughed, then discreetly reached for water. King Asherem sampled the roasted lamb. His brows knitted together. "This," he murmured, "cannot be right." Prince Zarek tasted the fish. Almost instantly, he set down his fork. "It overwhelms everything else." One by one, every judge sampled the affected dishes. The delicate balance that should have united the banquet had vanished. The broth clashed with the herbs. The lamb carried an unexpected bitterness. The fish was drowned beneath flavors that did not belong. Even the guests, seated closest to the judges, noticed their disappointment. A heavy silence settled over the great hall. Khepri stared in disbelief. No, his hands slowly tightened at his sides. That was not the food his team had prepared. His mother looked toward him in confusion. She had tasted those very dishes before they left the kitchens. They had been flawless. Pharaoh Neferkare's face darkened. He knew. The first challenge had been lost. When the final scores were announced, the result confirmed everyone's fears. The first challenge of the 3 dishes of the Nile, the royal kitchen master paused, is awarded to the Eastern Kingdom. Polite applause echoed through the hall. Within Kemet's delegation, no one celebrated. Khepri stood motionless. His assistants looked utterly defeated. Some lowered their heads in shame. Others struggled to understand how perfection had become failure. As the banquet concluded and the guests slowly departed, Khepri returned to the kitchens in silence. The remaining portions still rested upon the serving platters. He picked up a spoon, slowly tasted the broth. His eyes widened. Then he sampled the lamb. Finally, the fish. Each bite confirmed the same terrible truth. Someone had altered their food. His youngest assistant looked at him nervously. "Master Khepri, what happened?" Khepri stared silently at the platters. "I don't know." He spoke almost in a whisper. "But this," he gently set the spoon down, "is not what we cooked." For the first time since arriving at the palace, he realized he was not merely competing against another kingdom. Someone inside the royal kitchens wanted him to fail. Before he could gather his thoughts, hurried footsteps echoed through the corridor. A palace chamberlain stopped before him and bowed respectfully. "Master Khepri." Khepri looked up. "His Majesty, Pharaoh Neferkare." The chamberlain's expression remained unreadable. "Request your presence in his private study." Every sound in the kitchen seemed to disappear. No one spoke. No one moved. The palace chamberlain had barely finished speaking before two royal guards entered the kitchen. Their bronze weapons caught the firelight as they approached Khepri. Around him, the remaining cooks fell silent. No one needed to ask why the guards had come. The kingdom had lost the first challenge. 3 of Khepri's dishes had been nearly impossible to eat. Now Pharaoh Neferkare demanded an explanation. One of the guards stepped forward. "Khepri, grandson of Merit, you are ordered to appear before His Majesty." Khepri nodded calmly. "I understand." He surrendered the cloth in his hands and stepped away from the serving table. Almost immediately, whispers spread through the kitchen. This is what happens when a commoner is given the work of nobles. He arrived only yesterday, and they allowed him to lead 4 trained assistants. His failure has humiliated the whole kingdom. Pharaoh should never have trusted a village cook. Not everyone joined the cruel conversation. Several servants, who had tasted Khepri's bread, stared at the floor in uncomfortable silence. His assistants looked angry, but none dared argue with the royal guards. Khepri's mother hurried toward him. "My son!" The guard raised one hand, stopping her before she could reach him. Khepri met her frightened eyes. "Do not worry." "How can I not worry?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You know what failure before Pharaoh can mean." "I did not fail through carelessness." He glanced briefly at the ruined dishes. "The truth will reveal itself." His mother wanted to believe him. Yet, as the guards led him away, her strength left her. She fell to her knees upon the kitchen floor and clasped her hands tightly together. "Great gods of Kemet," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Protect my child." Several servants gathered around her. Others continued whispering. The jealous noble chef stood among them, watching Khepri disappear through the doorway. His face showed concern. Inside, however, he felt only satisfaction. The village cook had entered the palace with praise surrounding his name. Now he was being escorted away beneath armed guard. Everything had gone exactly as planned, or so he believed. Khepri followed the guards through corridors he had never seen before. The noisy kitchens faded behind him. The deeper they traveled into the palace, the quieter everything became. Painted walls displayed scenes of ancient victories, harvests, and pharaohs receiving tribute from foreign rulers. Tall oil lamps illuminated carved pillars, while guards stood at every entrance without moving. At last they reached Pharaoh Neferkare's private study. The doors opened. Khepri entered and immediately lowered himself to his knees. Pharaoh Neferkare stood behind the cedar table, still dressed in the ceremonial robes he had worn during the banquet. Royal advisors surrounded him. The royal kitchen master stood near the wall. So did royal physician Manes and the captain of the palace guard. No one looked pleased. Pharaoh Neferkare stared down at Khepri. "You were selected to lead one of Kemet's 5 kitchen teams." "Yes, Your Majesty." "You were trusted with food served before 2 royal houses, allied ambassadors, and representatives from every province." "Yes, Your Majesty." "And yet 3 of your dishes were so badly unbalanced that our judges could scarcely swallow them." Khepri lowered his head. Pharaoh Neferkare struck his palm against the table. Explain this disgrace.